So joining me on the show this time is Ryan from Cardboard Republic. Hi Ryan, and thanks for agreeing to be on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And you've just come back from PAX East, I believe.
I have. It's a 3-day convention here in the Boston area, and I was enjoying myself, so I apologize if I'm a little hoarse. It's a lot of yelling to be heard in there.
So, hot off the press news, because we're recording this on the Sunday. PAX East has finished today. It's primarily a video game convention, but you said about sort of 10-15% of it is for tabletop board games, is that right?
Yeah, they get about 15 to 20 or so publishers that come in and set up booths and try to show out some of their newer stuff. And this year was kind of different because they had a couple of slightly bigger publishers, more well-known publishers. There was a small corner for Fantasy Flight and Asmodee, which was their first time this year. But a lot of them tend to be kind of on the smaller side, maybe more regional or even on the indie side of things. So
right. And what cool stuff did you see there then? Did you get to see anything new?
So there was a number of things. Unpub is there, so for those who are familiar with the Unpublished Network, they have a booth there, and so they would kind of foster a lot of the Unpub games that come up from these parts. And so saw a number of games there that were particularly interesting. I think from the unpublished side, the two that were really the most interesting to me. One was this game called Laser Riders, which is a game that's being made by Cardboard Fortress, the folks who did Resistor.
Okay, yeah.
And the best way to describe this game is think of the light cycle race from Tron.
Yeah, which is amazing.
That's the game. That's it. It's
okay.
And you're basically creating these kind of rows and pathways of light of your spaceship, and you're trying to get through a couple of different markers to try to score them. But if you manage to cross another player's stream, you crash and your thing falls apart. And it's a very kind of simple game, but it was a lot of fun. So I'm really curious to see where that one goes.
Did you get to play that or just see it?
I did. Not only did I play, I won.
Okay, and did you make the light cycle noises while you were playing?
No, I didn't. But I repeatedly keep mentioning that this is like basically Tron without the IP, right. And how great it would be that you could, but obviously it's Disney, so that's not going to happen. So
okay, and what else did you see there that was of note?
So aside from that, the other kind of Kickstarter that really caught my attention is this game system, really called Lark Lamp, which is actually I think on Kickstarter currently. He's kind of developing it, and it's this game system that's basically built around a lantern, like a light lantern, and it has different panels, and that casts a light shadow onto the table, and then that shadow, that silhouette, is the board, and so you can do different things with it on there. And
so the game comes with a physical lantern.
It basically that is the game.
Oh right, right.
So there is no board. The board is the light that it casts based on how it's reflecting and all. And he's developing a whole system from it. So the one that's on there currently on Kickstarter, and the one he was demoing was a 10 to 15 minute 2-player game about kind of this moth that you're moving around and trying to get him to go into the light. But he's developing some other kind of games to work with it. Like, for example, I think he mentioned he was developing a dungeon crawler that'll kind of use the same thing. And the idea is to have kind of this light game system all based around this lantern. It's very innovative. It looks really pretty. So I'm really curious to see where that goes, even though it's probably a year and a half or so before we'll actually see it on the physical end, the completed end. Yeah, but the biggest thing I think in terms of name-worthy stuff that I had seen was I did get to play Widow's Walk, which is the upcoming expansion for Betrayal of House on the Hill.
Right.
So that was pretty exciting, even though pretty sure we died, but
so that wasn't a prototype of it. That would have been the finished version, even though it's not quite out yet, like a pre-production copy or something.
It was pre-production components, which is why I didn't have any pictures or anything on that. But the rules are basically done, the stories are done. It's pretty much a straightforward expansion. So for those who are familiar with the game, it's adding some more room tiles, it's adding some new cards, some new items, and 50 new stories, so it's doubling the amount of stories.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of really cool people that kind of came together and wrote some of these stories, so they weren't all just done by one or two people. It's a good litany of folks who made some of these stories. Some of them are kind of goofy, some of them are really serious, and some of them are really eccentric. And I only got to peek at a few of them. I didn't want to spoil myself, but I did get to see some the names of the folks who are doing it and the kind of stories that are being told. So
okay, cool. So that's some hot off the press news from PAX East. Before we get started with the rest of the interview, just tell the listeners a little bit, because some of the listeners here won't know what the Cardboard Republic is. So just tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So we are primarily a gaming review site. We also do some other written content. We have our own bi-weekly podcast called The Vox Republica, and we've actually started doing some video supplement on YouTube as well. But primarily we're a written review site. We've been around for over 3 years now, and we kind of we look at games kind of on a holistic level and talk about them from the angle of what is this game trying to do, who is it for, and who is it best suited towards, more so than kind of like my personal opinion.
Now on the website you've got an interesting section which is the gamer archetype section. So just tell us a bit about that.
Sure, and this kind of goes to what I was getting at just a moment ago, and kind of the heart of what we decided to do when we were coming up with the whole idea of the site a number of years ago. And the best way I can describe it is think of a movie critic, and if you take two really disparate movie types, a movie critic who really likes Victorian drama pieces, and then you have another person who they love the Marvel action hero movies.
Right.
Those are very different movies aimed at very different audiences, and so if you take one critic who favors one of those types and seat them down and make them watch the other, they may not be as favorable to that movie as the person who it's aimed towards.
Okay. Yep.
And it's also hard to then take those two on different levels and say which is empirically a better movie than the other.
Right.
It's really hard to do when you're doing it from a subjective review standpoint. What we decided to do was kind of fix that in a sense with the archetype system, which is what we built our site around. It's kind of part of our philosophy and how we approach our reviews on the site. So we in the archetype system, we have 6 different kind of player profiles, archetypes, of player behavior and player preferences as to how games are run and kind of why you're playing them and the style of the game that you're trying to play. And then we look at games through that prism and saying, okay, of these 6, and they're your broad range type of stuff, and most people fall into more than one category in every given time. There's no very few people kind of are like one category only at any given time, and they can change over time as well. But the idea is, if you have a game like Twilight Imperium, and that's a massive, really strategic, really kind of in-depth, involved game, and then you have something like Cards Against Humanity, which is very light, very interactive, but light on rules, and those are very different games. So that's the same idea as the kind of the movie critic sort of thing. So they're aimed at different audiences, and we review the games based on those criteria.
Right. So on the website, if you go there, it's cardboardrepublic.com. There is a section of what type of gamer are you, and it will ask you a series of 15 questions, and then it will tell you what you are. I came out as tactician, which I think is probably about right.
Yeah, that's really no surprise knowing you, actually.
Okay. Well, some of them I answered, and I looked at the question, and I thought I think it was the first question. It was, you're sitting down to play a game with a group of players who are really, really good at the game. What do you try and do? And I selected, well, I'll just wing it. Because actually, that doesn't mean I'm not going to take it seriously or anything like that. It's like, well, these are expert players. I'm going to lose. So my aim is to just learn as much about the game as I can. Not to have a strategy, not to try and do a specific thing. Literally just play the game and see how it goes, come last, and then take my experience away. But that probably didn't put me in the category as a tactician, but most of the other questions probably did.
Right, and there's the breakdown, obviously the questions are randomized, and the breakdown will kind of tabulate the most common responses that you have based on those, and then kind of figure out either the primary and secondary of that category. So we actually developed that that quiz to help with that. So it's we acknowledge that it's one of those kind of, it's the system that we have, we like it, but we also acknowledge that you kind of have to buy into it a little bit.
Yeah.
But once you do, and you can take that quiz, and it takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Once you understand, okay, this is that profile that we're referring to when we talk about it in future things in our reviews and our other mediums, then you can go, okay, so I'm that type of profile, this game is aimed at me.
Yeah, exactly. So you say that Cardboard Republic's been around for about 3 years or so?
I think we just hit 3.5 unofficially.
Okay. Your 3.5th birthday then. Hope you got a cake.
No, I do have a cookie though, so I'm going to go with that.
That'll do. So that's been around for 3.5 years, but how long would you say you've been seriously into games? Before that, or did it sort of happen at the same time?
Well, I've always had an interest in board games, and that hasn't changed since I was a kid. But that kind of, for a long time, it was more of your standard. I just like playing them, and there really wasn't anything to that. And then I kind of stepped away from them a little bit in my teen years and going into my college years, and kind of was more into the video game side. It was more accessible, and it was easier to do, and I was enjoying it more, partially because that was kind of the burgeoning time of the resurgence of what we consider modern board games. Right. So it hadn't really kind of hit the zenith and that upswing that we're seeing now. So you're still largely limited to either imports, which I wasn't really familiar with at the time, or kind of the early '90s type of stuff, which was either really kind of out there on the peripheral of people's attention, or they were still very much, at least in the U.S., being aimed towards kids. Aside from your classic Hasbro games. So what I realized though is around, I was probably back in 2000, probably mid-2000s, right after I finished university, was I got more interested in getting back into games. I started seeing these new games that I hadn't quite heard about. A friend of mine invited me one night, and we played this game called Arkham Horror, which got me really interested in it. And then there was another time where I had nothing to do one night, and somebody invited me over to a different house with a different group of people, and there was this game, Power Grid, that I had never heard of, and then there was stuff like that. And that really kind of spurned my interest in getting into board games, and it was also fulfilling what I felt was missing from the video game experience that I was kind of finding was on the decline of interest at the same time, because what I came to realize was the games that I loved as a teenager were the ones that we were doing, kind of the old LAN parties where you'd have people come over to the same house and you set up your network and you'd be playing these network games. So when you kill somebody or you defeat somebody, you can yell down the hallway to the next room, right? And that was the part that I loved. That I realized that was the part that I really enjoyed, was that interaction while playing the game. And it's a very different experience once everything shifted to being online. You don't have that anymore. You can still talk to people and engage with people in a game online, but it's not the same as to be able to walk down the room afterwards and say, "Oh man, I can't believe you just did that." And that's the part that really interested me. So board games really got me back into that social aspect that I felt was missing, particularly in the latter years of really being into video games. So,
but how long was it from then when you started going to Gen Con and things like that?
It took I would say a couple of years of kind of getting my feet in the water, finding out about these other games that I honestly hadn't realized existed. This was probably started thinking more seriously about getting into going to conventions and starting to do coverage and stuff probably around 2008, 2009 or so.
Right.
And that's when I started I started that formulative idea, and then I started checking into some regional conventions, some local conventions here, some smaller stuff, nothing crazy, probably around 2010, 2011, I'd say about 2010. And for the first couple of years of that, I was just kind of going as a fan of gaming. Yeah. And then it was in 2012 when we sat down, had a meeting with some folks here, and Aaron, who's part of the site, and then a couple other friends of mine, we decided, hey, let's actually go and let's do this. Let's actually do game coverages, and we came up with the archetype system. That was all in the summer of 2012, and so that's really where the switch came over into being beyond just, really engaged as a fan to wanting to kind of be part of that and bringing something new to it.
Yeah. And where's it going to go now then for the next few years? Have you got any plans or just more of the same?
My goal is to get bought by